Hello there. I'm your imaginary friend. I'd like to continue on with our reading of Jimbo by Algernon Blackwood. So let's just get into it. Oh, if you haven't heard part one, that's a good place to start. Chapter 6. His companion in prison. Shocks of terror, as they increase in number, apparently lessen in effect. The repeated calls made upon Jimbo's soul by the emotions of fear and astonishment had numbed it. Otherwise, the knowledge that he was locked in the room with this mysterious creature, beyond all possibility of escape, must have frightened him, as the saying is, out of his skin. As it was, however, he kept his head in a wonderful manner, and simply stared at the silent intruder as hard as ever he could stare. How in the world it got in was the principal thought in his mind. And after that, what in the world was it? The dawn must have come very swiftly, or else he'd been staring longer than he knew, for just then the sun topped the edge of the world and the window sill simultaneously, and sent a welcome ray of sunshine into the dingy room. It turned the grey light to silver and fell full upon the huddled figure crouching against the opposite wall. Jimbo caught his breath and stared harder than ever. It was a human figure, the figure apparently of a man, sitting crumpled up in a very uncomfortable sort of position on his haunches. It sat perfectly still. A black cloak with loose sleeves and a cowl or hood that completely concealed the face covered it from head to foot. The material of the cloak could not have been very thick, for inside the hood he caught the gleam of eyes as they roamed about the room and followed his movements. But for this glitter of the moving eyes, it might have been a figure carved in wood. Was it going to sit there forever, watching him? At first, he was afraid it was going to speak. Then he was afraid it wasn't. It might rise suddenly and come towards him. Yet the thought that it would not move at all was worse still. In this way, the two faced each other for several minutes, until, just as the position was becoming simply unbearable, a low whisper ran round the room. "At last! Oh, I've found him at last!" Jimbo was not quite sure of the words, though it was certainly a human voice that had spoken. But the suspense once broken, the boy could not stand it any longer, and with a rush of desperate courage he found his voice, a very husky one, and moved a step forward. "Who are you, please? And how did you get in?" he ventured with a great effort. Then he fell back against the wall, amazed at his own daring, and waited, with tightly clenched fists, for an answer. But he had not to wait very long, for almost immediately the figure rose awkwardly to its feet and came over to where he stood. Its manner of moving may best be described as shuffling, and it stretched in front of it a long cloaked arm, on which the sleeve hung, he thought, like clothes on a washing line. He breathed hard and waited. Like many other people with strong wills and sensitive nerves, Jimbo was both brave and a coward. He hoped nothing horrid was going to happen, but he was quite ready if it should. Yet now that the actual moment had come, he had no particular fear, and when he felt the touch of the hand on his shoulder, the words sprang naturally to his lips with a little trembling laugh, more of wonder, perhaps, than anything else. "You do look a horrid brute," he was going to say, but at the last moment he changed it to "thing," for with the true intuition of a child he recognized that the creature inside the cloak was a kind creature and well disposed toward him. "But how did you get in?" he added, looking up bravely into the black visage. "Because the doors are both locked on the outside, and I couldn't get out." By way of reply, the figure shuffled to one side, and taking the hand from his shoulder, pointed silently to a trap door in the floor behind him. As he looked, he saw it was being shut down stealthily by someone beneath. "Hush!" whispered the figure, almost inaudibly. "He's watching." "Who's watching?" he cried, curiosity taking the place of every other emotion. "I want to see." He ran forward to the spot where the trap door now lay flush with the floor, but before he had gone 2 steps, the black arms shot out and caught him. He turned, struggling, and in the scuffle that followed, the cloak shrouding the figure became disarranged. The hood dropped from the face, and he found himself looking straight into the eyes, not of a man, but of a woman. "It's you!" he cried. "You!" A shock ran right through his body, from his head to his feet, like a current of electricity, and he caught his breath as though he'd been struck. For one brief instant, the sinister face of someone who had terrified him in the past came back vividly to his mind, and he shrank away in terror. But it was only for an instant, the 20th part of an instant. Immediately, before he could even remember the name, recognition passed into darkness, and his memory shut down with a snap. He was staring into the face of an utter stranger, about whom he knew nothing and had no feelings particularly, one way or another. "I thought I knew you," he gasped. "But I've forgotten you again. And I thought you were going to be a man, too." "Jimbo!" cried the other, and in her voice was such unmistakable tenderness and yearning that the boy knew at once beyond doubt that she was his friend. "Jimbo!" She knelt down on the floor beside him, so that her face was on a level with his, and then opened both her arms to him. But though Jimbo was glad to have found a friend who was going to help him, he felt no particular desire to be embraced, and he stood obstinately where he was, with his back to the window. The morning sunshine fell upon her features and touched the thick coils of hair with glory. It was not, strictly speaking, a pretty face, but the look of real human tenderness there was very welcome and comforting, and in the kind brown eyes there shone a strange light that was not merely the reflection of the sunlight. The boy felt his heart warm to her as he looked, but her expression puzzled him. He would not accept the invitation of her arms. "Won't you come to me?" she said, her arms still outstretched. "I want to know who you are and what I'm doing here," he said. "I feel so funny, so old and so young and all mixed up. I can't make out who I am a bit. What's that funny name you call me?" "But Jimbo is your name," she said softly. "Then what's your name?" he added quickly. "My name," she repeated slowly after a pause, "is not as nice as yours. Besides, you need not know my name. You might dislike it." "But I must have something to call you," he persisted. "But if I told you, and you disliked the name, you might dislike me too," she said, still hesitating. Jimbo saw the expression of sadness in her eyes, and it won his confidence, though he hardly knew why. He came up closer to her and put his puzzled little face next to hers. "I like you very much already," he whispered, "and if your name is a horrid one, I'll change it for you at once. Please tell me what it is." She drew the boy to her and gave him a little hug, and he did not resist. For a long time she did not answer. He felt vaguely that something of dreadful importance hung about this revelation of her name. He repeated his question. At length she replied, speaking in a very low voice, and with her eyes fixed intently upon his face. "My name," she said, "is Ethel Lake." "Ethel Lake," he repeated after her. The words sounded somehow familiar to him. Surely he'd heard that name before. Were not the words associated with something in his past that had been unpleasant? A curious sinking sensation came over him as he heard them. His companion watched him intently while he repeated the words over to himself several times, as if to make sure he had got them right. There was a moment's hesitation as he slowly went over them once again. Then he turned to her, laughing. "I like your name, Ethel Lake," he said. "It's a nice name, Miss... Again he hesitated, while a little warning tremor ran through his mind, and he wondered for an instant why he said Miss. But it passed as suddenly as it had come, and he finished the sentence. "Miss Lake, I shall call you." He stared into her eyes as he said it. "Then you don't remember me at all," she cried, with a sigh of intense relief. You've quite forgotten?" I never saw you before, did I? How can I remember you? I don't remember any of the things I've forgotten. Are you one of them?" For reply, she caught him to her breast and kissed him. "You precious little boy," she said. "Oh, I'm so glad. Oh, so glad." "But do you remember me?" he asked, sorely puzzled. "Who am I? Haven't I been born yet, or something funny like that?" "If you don't remember me," said the other, her face happy with smiles that had evidently come only just in time to prevent tears, "there is not much good telling you who you are. But your name, if you really want to know, is—" She hesitated a moment. "Be quick, Miss Lake, or you'll forget it again." She laughed rather bitterly. "Oh, I never forget. I can't," she said. "I wish I could. Your name is James Stone, and Jimbo is short for James. Now you know." She might just as well have said Bill Sykes, for all the boy knew or remember. "What a silly name," he laughed. "But it can't be my real name. Oh, I should know it. I've never heard it before." After a moment he added, "Am I an old man? I feel just like one. I suppose I'm grown up so fast that I've forgotten what came before." "You're not grown up, dear, at least not exactly." She glanced down at his alpaca knickerbockers and brown stockings, and as he followed her eyes and saw the dirty buttoned boots, there came to his mind some dim memory of where he had last put them on, and of someone who'd helped him. But it all passed like a swift meteor across the dark night of his forgetfulness, and was lost in mist. "You mustn't judge by these silly clothes," he laughed. "I shall change them as soon as I can find—" He stopped short. No words came. A feeling of utter loneliness and despair swept suddenly over him, drenching him from head to foot. He felt lost and friendless, naked, homeless, cold. He was ever on the brink of regaining a whole lot of knowledge and experience that he had known once, long ago, ever so long ago. But it always kept just out of his reach. He glanced at Miss Lake, feeling that she was his only possible comfort in a terrible situation. She met his look and drew him tenderly towards her. "Now listen to me," she said gently. "I've something to tell you about myself." He was all attention in a minute. "I'm a discharged governess," she began, holding her breath when once the words were out. "Discharged?" he repeated vaguely. What's that? What for?" "For frightening a child. I told a little boy awful stories that weren't true. They terrified him so much that I was sent away. That's why I'm here now. It's my punishment. I'm a prisoner here until I can find him and help him to escape." "Oh, I say," he exclaimed quickly, as though remembering something. But it passed, and he looked up at her, half bored, half politely. "Escape from what?" he asked. "From here. This is the empty house I told the stories about. And you are the little boy I frightened. Now at last I've found you, and I'm going to save you." She paused, watching him with eyes that never left his face for an instant. Jimbo was delighted to hear he was going to be rescued, but he felt no interest at all in her story of having frightened a little boy who was himself. He thought it was very nice of her to take so much trouble, and he told her so, and when he went up and kissed her and thanked her, he saw to his surprise that she was crying. For the life of him he could not understand why a discharged governess, whom he met apparently for the first time in the empty house, should weep over him and show him so much affection. But he could think of nothing to say, so he just waited till she had finished. "You see, if I can save you," she said between her sobs, "it will be all right again, and I shall be forgiven, and she'll be able to escape with you. I want you to escape, so that you can get back to life again." "Oh, Then I'm dead, am I? Not exactly dead, she said, drying her eyes with a corner of her black hood. You've had a funny accident, you know. If your body gets all right so that you can go back and live in it again, then you're not dead. But if it's so badly injured that you can't work in it any more, then you are dead, and will have to stay dead. You're still joined to the body in a fashion, you see. He stared and listened, not understanding much. It all bored him. She talked without explaining, he thought. An immense sponge had passed over the slate of the past and wiped it clean beyond recall. He was utterly perplexed. How funny you are, he said vaguely, thinking more of her tears than her explanations. Water won't stay in a cracked bottle, she went on, and you can't stay in a broken body. But they're trying to mend it now, and if we can escape in time, you can be an ordinary happy little boy in the world again. Then are you dead too? He asked. Or nearly dead? I am out of my body, like you, she answered evasively, after a moment's pause. He was still looking at her in a dazed sort of way when she suddenly sprang to her feet and let the hood drop back over her face. Hush, she said. She whispered. He's listening again. At the same moment, a sound came from beneath the floor on the other side of the room, and Jimbo saw the trapdoor being slowly raised above the level of the floor. Your number is 102, said a voice that sounded like the rushing of a river. Instantly the trapdoor dropped again, and he heard heavy steps rumbling away into the interior of the house. He looked at his companion and saw her terrified face as she lifted her hood. He always blunders along like that, she whispered, bending her head on one side to listen. He can't see properly in the daylight. He hates sunshine, and usually only goes out after dark. She was white and trembling. Is that the person who brought me in here this morning at such a frightful pace? He asked, bewildered. She nodded. He wanted to get in before it was light, so that you couldn't see his face. Is he such a fright? Asked the boy, beginning to share her evident feeling of horror. His fright, she said in an awed whisper. But never talk about him again unless you can't help it. He always knows when he's being talked about, and he likes it, because it gives him more power. Jimbo only stared at her, without comprehending. Then his mind jumped to something else he wanted badly to have explained, and he asked her about his number and why he was called number 102. Oh, that's easier, she said. 102 is your number among the frightened children. There are 101 of them, and you are the last arrival. Haven't you seen them yet? It is also the temperature of your broken little body lying on the bed in the night nursery at home, she added, though he hardly caught her words, so low were they spoken. Jimbo then described how the children had sung and danced to him, and went on to ask 100 questions about them. But Miss Lake would give him very little information, and said he would not have very much to do with them. Most of them had been in the house for years and years, so long that they could probably never escape at all. They are all frightened children, she said, little ones scared out of their wits by silly people who meant to amuse them with stories, or to frighten them into being well behaved, nursery maids, elder sisters, and even governesses. And they can never escape. Not unless the people who frightened them come to their rescue, run the risk of being caught themselves. As she spoke, there rose from the depths of the house the sound of muffled voices, children's voices singing faintly together. It rose and fell exactly like the wind, and with his little tune. It was weird and magical, but so utterly mournful that the boy felt the tears start to his eyes. It drifted away, too, just as the wind does over the tops of the trees, dying into the distance, and all became still again. It's just like the wind, he said, and I do love the wind. It makes me feel so sad and so happy, Why is it?" The governess did not answer. "How old am I really?" he went on. "How can I be so old and so ignorant? I've forgotten such an awful lot of knowledge. The fact is, well, perhaps you won't quite understand, but you're really two ages at once. Sometimes you feel as old as your body, and sometimes as old as your soul. You're still connected with your body, so you get the sensations of both mixed up." "Then is the body younger than the soul?" "The soul, that is yourself," she answered, "is so old, awfully old, as old as the stars and older. But the body is no older than itself. Of course, how could it be?" "Of course," repeated the boy, who was not listening to a word she said. "How could it be? But it doesn't matter how old you are, or how young you feel, as long as you don't hate me for having frightened you," she said after a pause. "That's the chief thing." He was very, very puzzled. He could not help feeling it had been rather unkind of her to frighten him so badly that he'd literally been frightened out of his skin. But he couldn't remember anything about it, and she was taking so much trouble to save him now that he quite forgave her. He nestled up against her and said of course he liked her, and she stroked his curly head and mumbled a lot of things to herself that he couldn't understand a bit. But in spite of his newfound friend, the feeling of overmastering loneliness would suddenly rush over him. She might be a protector, but she was not a real companion, and he knew that somewhere or other he'd left a lot of other real companions whom he now missed dreadfully. He longed more than he could say for freedom. He wanted to be able to come and go as he pleased, to play about in a garden somewhere as of old, to wander over soft green lawns among laburnums and sweet-smelling lilac trees, and to be up to all his old tricks and mischief, though he could not remember in detail what they were. In a word, he wanted to escape. His whole being yearned to escape and be free again. Yet here he was, a wretched prisoner in a room like a prison cell, with a sort of monster for a keeper, and a troop of horrible, frightened children somewhere else in the house to keep him company. And outside, there was only a hard, narrow, paved courtyard with a high wall round it. It was too terrible to think of, and his heart sank down within him till he felt as if he could do nothing else but cry. "I shall save you in time," whispered the governess, as though she read his thoughts. "You must be patient and do what I tell you, and I promise to get you out. Only be brave, and don't ask too many questions. We shall win in the end, and escape." Suddenly he looked up with quite a new expression in his face. "But I say, Miss Cake, I'm frightfully hungry. I've had nothing to eat since I can't remember when, but ever so long ago." "You needn't call me Miss Cake, though," she laughed. I suppose it's because I'm so hungry." "Then you'll call me Miss Lake when you're thirsty, perhaps," she said. "But anyhow, I'll see what I can get you. Only you must eat as little as possible. I want you to get very thin. What you feel is not really hunger. It's only a memory of hunger, and you'll soon get used to it." He stared at her, a very distrustful little face, as she crossed the room, making this new announcement, and just as she disappeared through the trap door, only her head being visible, she added with great emphasis, "The thinner you get, the better, because the thinner you are, the lighter you are, and the lighter you are, the easier it will be to escape. Remember, the thinner, the better, the lighter, the better, and don't ask a lot of questions about it." With that, the trap door closed over her, and Jimbo was left alone, with her last strange words ringing in his ears. Chapter 7. The Spell of the Empty House. It was not long before Jimbo realized that the house and everything connected with it spelled for him one message and one only, a message of fear. From the first day of his imprisonment, the forces of his whole being shaped themselves without further ado into one intense, single, concentrated desire to escape. Freedom, escape into the world beyond that terrible high wall, was his only object. And Miss Lake, the governess, as its symbol, was his only hope. He asked a lot of questions and listened to a lot of answers, but all he really cared about was how he was going to escape and when. All her other explanations were tedious, and he only half listened to them. His faith in her was absolute, his patience unbounded. She had come to save him, and he knew that before long she would accomplish her end. He felt a blind and perfect confidence. But meanwhile, his fear of the house and his horror for the secret being who meant to keep him prisoner, till at length he became one of the troop of frightened children, increased by leaps and bounds. Presently the trapdoor creaked again, and the governess reappeared. In her hand was a small white jug and a soup plate. "Thin gruel and skim milk," she explained, pouring out a substance like paste into the soup plate and handing him a big wooden spoon. But Jimbo's hunger had somehow vanished. It wasn't real hunger, she told him, but only a sort of memory of being hungry. They're trying to feed your broken body now in the night nursery, so you feel a sort of ghostly hunger here, even though you're out of the body. "It's easily satisfied, at any rate," he said, looking at the paste in the soup plate. "No one actually eats or drinks here." "But I'm sullied, am I not?" he said. "People always think they're sullied everywhere," she laughed. "It's only a question of degree. Solidity here means a different thing to solidity there." "I can get thinner, though, can't I?" he asked, thinking of her remark about escape being easier the lighter he grew. She assured him there would be no difficulty about that, and after replying evasively to a lot more questions, she gathered up the dishes and once more disappeared through the trap door. Jimbo watched her going down the ladder into the black gulf below and wondered greatly where she went to and what she did down there. But on these points the governess had refused to satisfy his curiosity, and every time she appeared or disappeared, the atmosphere of mystery came and went with her. As he stared, wondering, sound suddenly made itself heard behind him, and on turning quickly round, he saw to his great surprise that the door into the passage was open. This was more than he could resist, and in another minute, with mingled feelings of dread and delight, he was out in the passage. When he was first brought to the house 2 hours before, it had been too dark to see properly, but now the sun was high in the heavens, and the light still increasing. He crept cautiously to the head of the stairs, and peered over it into the well of the house. It was still too dark to make things out clearly, but as he looked, he thought something moved among the shadows below, and for a moment his heart stood still with fear. A large gray face seemed to be staring up at him out of the gloom. He clutched the banisters and felt as if he hardly had strength enough in his legs to get back to the room he'd just left. But almost immediately the terror passed, for he saw that the face resolved itself into the mingling of light and shadow, and the features, after all, were of his own creation. He went on slowly, stealthily, down the staircase. It was certainly an empty house. There were no carpets. The passages were cold and draughty. The paper curled from the damp walls, leaving ugly discolored patches about. Cobwebs hung in many places from the ceiling. The windows were more or less broken, and all were coated so thickly with dirt that the rain had traced little furrows from top to bottom. Shadows hung about everywhere, and Jimbo thought every minute he saw moving figures, but the figures always resolved themselves into nothing when he looked closely. He began to wonder how far it was safe to go, and why the governess had arranged for the door to be opened, for he felt sure it was she who had done this, and that it was all right for him to come out. Fright, she had said, was never about in the daylight, but at the same time something warned him to be ready at a moment's notice to turn and dash up the stairs again to the room where he was at least comparatively safe. So he moved along very quietly and very cautiously. He passed many rooms with the doors open, all empty and silent. Some of them had tables and chairs, but no sign of occupation. The grates were black and empty, the walls blank, the windows unshuttered. Everywhere was only silence and shadows. There was no sign of the frightened children or of where they lived, no trace of another staircase leading to the region where the governess went when she disappeared down the ladder through the trapdoor. Only hushed, listening, cold silence, and shadows that seemed forever shifting from place to place as he moved past them. This illusion of people peering at him from corners, behind doors just ajar, was very strong. Yet whenever he turned his head to face them, lo, they were gone, and the shadows rushed in to fill their places. The spell of the empty house was weaving itself slowly and surely about his heart. Yet he went on, pluckily, full of a dreadful curiosity, continuing his search, and at length, after passing through another gloomy passage, he was in the act of crossing the threshold of an open door leading out into the courtyard, when he stopped short and clutched the doorpost with both hands. Someone had laughed. He turned, trying to look in every direction at once, but there was no sign of any living being. Yet the sound was close beside him. He could still hear it ringing in his ears, a mocking sort of laugh in a harsh, guttural voice. The blood froze in his veins, and he hardly knew which way to turn, when another voice sounded, and his terror disappeared as if by magic. It was Miss Lake's voice, calling to him over the banisters at the top of the house, and its tone so cheerful that all his courage came back in a twinkling. "Go out into the yard," she called, "and play in the sunshine. But don't stay too long." Jimbo answered, "All right," in a rather feeble little voice, and went on down the passage and out into the yard. The June sunshine lay hot and still over the paved court, and he looked up into the blue sky overhead. As he looked at the high wall that closed it in on three sides, he realized more than ever that he was caught in a monstrous trap from which there could be no ordinary means of escape. He could never climb over such a wall, even with a ladder. He walked out a little way and noticed the rank weeds growing in patches in the corners. Decay and neglect left everywhere their dismal signs. The yard, in spite of the sunlight, seemed as gloomy and cheerless as the house itself. In one corner stood several little white upright stones, each about 3 feet high. There seemed to be some writing on them. He was in the act of going nearer to inspect when a window opened, and he heard someone calling to him in a loud, excited whisper. "Psst! Come in, Jimbo, at once. Quick! Run for your life!" He glanced up, quaking with fear, and saw the governess leaning out of the open window. At another window, a little beyond her, he thought a number of white little faces pressed against the glass, but he had no time to look more closely, for something in Miss Lake's voice made him turn and run into the house and up the stairs as though Fright himself were close at his heels. He flew up the 3 flights and found the governess coming out on the top landing to meet him. She caught him in her arms and dashed back into the room, as if there was not a moment to be lost, slamming the door behind her. "How in the world did you get out?" she gasped, breathless as himself almost, and pale with alarm. "Oh, another second, and he'd have had you." "I found the door open." "He opened it on purpose," she whispered, looking quickly round the room. "He meant you to go out." "But you called me to play in the yard," he said. "I heard you, so of course I thought it was safe." "No," she declared, "I never called to you. That wasn't my voice. That was one of his tricks. I only this minute found the door open and you gone. Oh, Jimbo, that was a narrow escape. You must never go out of this room till I tell you. And never believe any of these voices you hear. You'll hear lots of them, saying all sorts of things. But unless you see me, Don't believe it's my voice." Jimbo promised. He was very frightened, but she would not tell him any more, saying it would only make it more difficult to escape if he knew too much in advance. He told her about the laugh and the gravestones and the faces at the other window, but she would not tell him what he wanted to know. At last he gave up asking. A very deep impression had been made on his mind, however, and he began to realize, more than he had hitherto done, the horror of his prison and the power of his dreadful keeper. But when he began to look about him again, he noticed that there was a new thing in the room. The governess had left him and was bending over it. She was doing something very busily indeed. He asked her what it was. "I'm making your bed," she said. It was indeed a bed, and he felt, as he looked at it, there was something very familiar and friendly about the yellow framework and the little brass knobs. "I brought it up just now," she explained, "but it's not for sleeping in it. It's only for you to lie down on, and also partly to deceive him." "Why not for sleeping?" "There's no sleeping at all here," she went on calmly. "Why not?" "You can't sleep out of your body," she laughed. "Why not?" he asked again. "Your body goes to sleep, but you don't," she explained. "Oh, I see." His head was whirling. "And my body, my real body, is lying asleep, unconscious, they call it, in the night nursery at home. It's sound asleep. That's why you are here. It can't wake up until you go back to it, and you can't go back to it till you escape, even if it's ready for you before then. The bed is only for you to rest on, for you can rest, though you can't sleep." Jimbo stared blankly at the governess for some minutes. He was debating something in his mind, something very important, and just then it was his older self and not the child that was uppermost. Apparently, it was soon decided, for he walked sedately up to her and said very gravely, with her serious eyes fixed on his face, "Miss Lake, are you really Miss Lake?" "Of course I am." "You're not a trick of his? The voices, I mean." "No, Jimbo. I am really Miss Lake, the discharged governess who frightened you." There was profound anxiety in every word. Jimbo waited a minute, still looking steadily into her eyes. Then he put out his hand cautiously and touched her. He rose a little on tiptoe to be on a level with her face, taking a fold of her cloak in each hand. The soul knowledge was in his eyes just then, not the mere curiosity of the child. "And are you dead?" he asked, sinking his voice into a whisper. For a moment, the woman's eyes wavered. She turned white and tried to move away, but the boy seized her hand and peered more closely into her face. "I mean, if we escape and I get back into my body," he whispered, "will you get back into yours too?" The governess made no reply, and shifted uneasily on her feet, but the boy would not let her go. "Please answer," he urged, still in a whisper. "Jimbo, what funny questions you ask," she said at last, in a husky voice, but trying to smile. "But I want to know," he said. "I must know. I believe you are giving up everything just to save me. Everything. I don't want to be saved unless you come too. Tell me." The color came back to her cheeks a little, and her eyes grew moist. Again she tried to slip past him, but he prevented her. "You must tell me," he urged. "I would rather stay here with you than escape back into my body and leave you behind." Jimbo knew it was his older self speaking, the freed spirit rather than the broken body, but he felt the strain was very great. He could not keep it up much longer. Any minute he might slip back into the child again and lose interest and be unequal to the task he now saw so clearly before him. "Quick!" he cried in a louder voice. "Tell me! You're giving up everything to save me, aren't you? And if I escape, you will be left alone. Quick! Answer me! Oh, be quick! I'm slipping back!" Already he felt his thoughts becoming confused again as the spirit merged back into the child. In another minute the boy would usurp the older self. You see, began the governess at length, speaking very gently, sadly, I am bound to make amends, whatever happens. I must atone. But already he found it hard to follow. Atone? He asked. What does atone mean? He moved back a step and glanced about the room. The moment of concentration passed without bearing fruit. His thoughts began to wander again, like a child's. Anyhow, we shall escape together when the chance comes, shan't we? He said. Yes, darling, we shall, she said, in a broken voice. And if you do what I tell you, it will come very soon, I hope. She drew him towards her and kissed him, and though he didn't respond very heartily, he felt he liked it and was sure that she was good and meant to do the best possible for him. Jimbo asked nothing more for some time. He turned to the bed where he found a mattress and a blanket, but no sheets, and sat down on the edge and waited. The governess was standing by the window, looking out. Her back was turned to him. He heard an occasional deep sigh come from her, but he was too busy now with his own sensations to trouble much about her. Looking past her, he saw the sea of green leaves dancing lazily in the sunshine. Something seemed to beckon him from beyond the high wall, and he longed to go out and play in the shade of the elms and hawthorns. For the horror of the empty house was closing in upon him steadily but surely, and he longed for escape into a bright, unhaunted atmosphere more than anything else in the whole world. His thoughts ran on in this vein till presently he noticed that the governess was moving about the room. She crossed over and tried first one door and then the other. Both were fastened. Next she lifted the trapdoor and peered down into the black hole below. That, too, apparently, was satisfactory, and she came over to the bedside on tiptoe. Jimbo, I've got something very important to ask you, she began. All right, he said, full of curiosity. You must answer me exactly. Everything depends on it. I will. She took another long look round the room, and then, in a still lower whisper, bent over him and asked, Have you any pain? Where? He asked, remembering to be exact. Anywhere? He thought a moment. None, thank you. None at all. Anywhere, she insisted. None at all. Anywhere, he said with decision. She seemed disappointed. Never mind. It's a little soon yet, perhaps, she said. We must have patience. We'll come in time. But I don't want any pain, he said, rather ruefully. You can't escape till it comes. I don't understand a bit what you mean. He began to feel alarmed at the notion of escape and pain going together. You will understand later, though, she said soothingly. It won't hurt very much. The sooner the pain comes, the sooner we can try to escape. Nowhere can there be escape without it. And with that she left him, disappearing without another word into the hole below the trap, and leaving him disconsolate yet excited, alone in the room. Chapter 8. The Gallery of Ancient Memories. With everyone, of course, the measurement of time depends largely upon the state, the emotions. But in Jimbo's case it was curiously exaggerated. This may have been because he had no standard of memory by which to test the succession of minutes. But whatever it was, the hours passed very quickly, and the evening shadows were already darkening the room when at length he got up from the mattress and went over to the window. Outside, the high elms were growing dim. Soon the stars would be out in the sky. The afternoon had passed away like magic, and the governess still left him alone. He could not quite understand why she went away for such long periods. The darkness came down very swiftly, and it was night almost before he knew it. Yet he felt no drowsiness, no desire to yawn and get under sheets and blankets. Sleep was evidently out of the question, and the hours slipped away so rapidly that it made little difference whether he sat up all night or whether he slept. It was his first night in the empty house, and he wondered how many more he would spend there before escape came. He stood at the window, peering out into the growing darkness and thinking long, long thoughts. Below him yawned the black gulf of the yard, and the outline of the enclosing wall was only just visible. But beyond the elms rose far into the sky, and he could hear the wind singing softly in their branches. The sound was very sweet. It suggested freedom and the flight of birds and all that was wild and unrestrained. The wind could never really be a prisoner. Its voice sang of open spaces and unbounded distances, of flying clouds and mountains, of mighty woods and dancing waves. Above all, of wings, free, swift, and unconquerable wings. This rushing song of wind among the leaves made him feel too sad to listen long, and he lay down upon the bed again, still thinking. The house was utterly still. Not a thing stirred within its walls. He felt lonely and began to long for the companionship of the governess. He would have called aloud for her to come, only he was afraid to break the appalling silence. He wondered where she was all this time, and how she spent the long, dark hours of the sleepless nights. Were all these things really true that she told him? Was he actually out of his body? Was his name really Jimbo? His thoughts kept groping backwards, ever seeking the other companions he had lost. But like a piece of stretched elastic, too short to reach its object, they always came back with a snap just when he seemed on the point of finding them. He wanted these companions very badly indeed. But the struggling of his memory was painful, and he could not keep the effort up for very long at one time. The effort once relaxed, however, his thoughts wandered freely where they would, and there rose before his mind's eye dim suggestions, memories far more distant, ghostly scenes and faces that passed before him in endless succession, but always faded away before he could properly seize and name them. This memory, so stubborn as regards quite recent events, began to play strange tricks with him. It carried him away into a past so remote that he could not connect it with himself at all, and it was like dreaming of scenes and events that had happened to someone else. Yet all the time he knew quite well those things had happened to him and to no one else. It was the memory of the soul asserting itself now that the clamor of the body was low. It was an underground river coming to the surface for odd minutes here and there, showing its waters to the stars just long enough to catch their ghostly reflections before it rolled away underground again. Yet, swift and transitory as they were, these glimpses brought in their train sensations that were too powerful ever to have troubled his child mind in its present body. They stirred in him the strong emotions, the ecstasies, the terrors, the yearnings of a much more distant past, whispering to him, could he have but understood, of an infinitely deeper layer of memories and experiences which, now released from the burden of the immediate years, strove to awaken into life again. The soul in that little body covered with alpaca knickerbockers and a sailor blouse seemed suddenly to have access to a storehouse of knowledge that must have taken centuries rather than a few short years to acquire. It was all very queer. The feeling of tremendous age grew mysteriously over him. He realized he'd been wandering for ages. He'd been to the stars and also to the deeps. He'd roamed over strange mountains, far away from cities or inhabited places of the earth, and had lived by streams whose waves were silvered by moonlight dropping softly through whispering palm branches. Some of these ghostly memories brought him sensations of keenest happiness, icy, silver, radiant. Others swept through his heart like a cold wave, leaving behind a feeling of unutterable woe and a sense of loneliness that almost made him cry aloud. And there came voices, too, voices that had slept so long in the inner kingdoms of silence they failed to rouse in him the very slightest emotion of recognition. Worn out at length with the surging of these strange hosts through him, he got up and went to the open window again. The night was very dark and warm, but the stars had disappeared, and there was the hush and the faint odor of coming rain in the air. He smelt leaves and the earth and the moist things of the ground. the wonderful perfume of the life of the soil. The wind had dropped. All was silent as the grave. The leaves of the elm trees were motionless. No bird or insect raised its voice. Everything slept. He alone was watchful, awake. Leaning over the window-sill, his thoughts searched for the governess, and he wondered anew where she was spending the dark hours. She, too, he felt sure, was wakeful somewhere, watching with him, plotting their escape together, and always mindful of his safety. His reverie was suddenly interrupted by the flight of an immense night-bird dropping through the air just above his head. He sprang back into the room with a startled cry as it rushed past in the darkness with a great swishing of wings. The size of the creature filled him with awe. It was so close that the wind it made lifted the hair on his forehead. He could almost feel the feathers brush his cheeks. He strained his eyes to try and follow it, but the shadows were too deep and he could see nothing. Only in the distance, growing every moment fainter, he could hear the noise of big wings threshing the air. He waited a little, wondering if another bird would follow it, or if it would presently return to its perch on the roof. And then his thoughts passed on to uncertain memories of other big birds, hawks, owls, eagles, that he'd seen somewhere, in places now beyond the reach of distinct recollections. Soon the light began to dawn in the east, and he made out the shape of the elm trees and the dreadful prison wall. And with the first real touch of morning light, he heard a familiar creaking sound in the room behind him and saw the black hood of the governess rising through the trapdoor in the floor. "But you've left me alone all night," he said at once, reproachfully, as she kissed him. "On purpose," she answered. "He'd get suspicious if I stayed too much with you. It's different in the daytime when he can't see properly." "Where's he been all night, then?" asked the boy. "Last night he was out most of the time. Hunting." "Hunting?" he repeated with excitement. "Hunting what?" "Children. Frightened children," she replied, lowering her voice. "That's how he found you." It was a horrible thought. Fright, hunting for victims to bring to his dreadful prison. Jimbo shivered as he heard it. "And how did you get on all this time?" she asked, hurriedly changing the subject. "I've been remembering. That is, half remembering. An awful lot of things, and feeling, oh, so old. I never want to remember anything again," he said wearily. "You will forget quick enough when you get back into your body and have only the body memories," she said, with a sigh that he did not understand. "But now, tell me," she added in a more serious voice, "have you had any pain yet?" He shook his head. She stepped up beside him. "None there?" she asked, touching him lightly, just behind the shoulder blades. Jimbo jumped as if he'd been shot and uttered a piercing yell. "That hurts!" he screamed. "I'm so glad!" cried the governess. "That's the pain's coming at last." Her face was beaming. "Coming?" he echoed. "I think they've come. But if they hurt as much as that, I think I'd rather not escape," he added ruefully. "The pain won't last more than a minute," she said calmly. "You must be brave. Stand it. There's no escape without pain. From anything." "If there's no other way," he said pluckily, "I'll try, but you see," she went on, rather absently, "at this very moment the doctor is probing the wounds in your back, where the horns went in." But he was not listening. Her explanations always made him want to either cry or to laugh. This time he laughed, and the governess joined him while they sat on the edge of the bed together, talking of many things. He did not understand all her explanations, but it comforted him to hear them. So long as somebody understood, no matter who, he felt it was all right. In this way, several days and nights passed quickly away. The pains were apparently no nearer, but as Miss Lake showed no particular anxiety about their non-arrival, he waited patiently too, dreading the moment, yet also looking forward to it exceedingly. During the day, the governess spent most of the time in the room with him, but at night, when he was alone, the darkness became enchanted, the room haunted, when he passed into the long, long gallery of ancient memories. Chapter 9. Just a bit. The means of escape. A week passed, and Jimbo began to wonder if the pains he so much dreaded, yet so eagerly longed for, were ever coming at all. The imprisonment was telling upon him, and he grew very thin, and consequently very light. The nights, though he spent them alone, were easily borne, for he was then intensely occupied, and the time passed swiftly. The moment it was dark, he stepped into the gallery of memories, and in a little while passed into a new world of wonder and delight. But the daytime seemed always long. He stood for hours by the window, watching the trees and the sky, and what he saw always set painful currents running through his blood, unsatisfied longings, yearnings, and immense desires he could never understand. The white clouds on their swift journeys took with him something from his heart every time he looked upon them. They melted into air and blue sky, and lo, that something came back to him, charged with all the wild freedom and magic of open spaces, distance, and rushing winds. But the change was close at hand. One night, as he was standing by the open window, listening to the drip of the rain, he felt a deadly weakness steal over him. Strength went out of his legs. First he turned hot, then he turned cold. Clammy perspiration broke out all over him, and it was all he could do to crawl across the room and throw himself onto the bed. But no sooner was he stretched out on the mattress than the feelings passed entirely, and left behind them an intoxicating sense of strength and lightness. His muscles became like steel springs. His bones were strong as iron and light as cork. A wonderful vigor had suddenly come into him, and he felt as if he had just stepped from a dungeon into fresh air. He was ready to face anything in the world. But before he had time to realize the full enjoyment of these new sensations, a stinging, blinding pain shot suddenly through his right shoulder, as if a red-hot iron had pierced to the very bone. He screamed out in agony, though even while he screamed, the pain passed. Then the same thing happened in his other shoulder. It shot through his back with equal swiftness. It was gone, leaving him lying on the bed, trembling with pain, but the instant it was gone, the delightful sensations of strength and lightness returned, and he felt as if his whole body were charged with some new and potent force. The pains had come at last. Jimbo had no notion how they could possibly be connected with escape, but Miss Lake, his kind and faithful friend Miss Lake, had said that no escape was possible without them, and had promised that they should be brief. And this was true, for the entire escapade had not taken a minute of time. Escape! Escape! The words rushed through him like a flame of fire. Out of this dreadful empty house, into the open spaces, beyond the prison wall, out where the wind and the rain could touch him, where he could feel the grass beneath his feet and could see the whole sky at once instead of this narrow strip through the window. His thoughts flew to the stars and the clouds. But a strange humming of voices interrupted his flight of imagination, and he saw that the room was suddenly full of moving figures. They were passing before him with silent footsteps across the window, from door to door. How they'd come in or how they went out he never knew, but his heart stood still for an instant as he recognized the mournful figures of the frightened children filing before him, a slow procession. They were singing, though it sounded more like a chorus of whispering than actual singing, and as they moved past with the measured steps of their sorrowful dance, he caught the words of the song he had heard them sing when he first came into the house. We hear the little voices, wind, singing of freedom we may never find. Jimbo put his fingers into his ears, but still the sound came through. He heard the words almost as if they were inside himself, his own thoughts singing We hear the little footsteps in the rain, running to help us, though they run in vain, tapping in hundreds on the window pane. The horrible procession filed past and melted always near the door. They were gone as mysteriously as they'd come, almost before he realized it. He sprang from the bed and tried the doors. Both were locked. How in the world had the children got in and out? The whispering voices rose again in the night air, and this time he was sure they came from outside. He ran to the open window and thrust his head out cautiously. Sure enough, the procession was moving slowly, still with the steps of that impish dance across the courtyard stones. He could just make out the slow waving arms, the thin bodies, and the white little faces as they passed on silent feet through the darkness. And again a fragment of the song rose to his ears as he watched and filled him with an overpowering sadness. We have no joy in any children's game, for happiness to us is but a name, since terror kissed us with his lips of flame. And he noticed that the group was growing smaller. Already the numbers were less. Somewhere, over there in the dark corner of the yard, the children disappeared. It was too dark to see precisely how or where. We dance with phantoms and with shadows play, rose to his ears. Suddenly he remembered the little white upright stones he'd seen in that corner of the yard, and understood. One by one they vanished, just behind those stones. Jimbo shivered and drew his head in. He did not like those upright stones. They made him uncomfortable and afraid. Now, however, the last child had disappeared and the song had ceased. He realized what his fate would be if the escape were not successful. He would become one of this band of frightened children, dwelling somewhere behind the upright stones, terrified shadow, waiting in vain to be rescued, waiting perhaps forever and ever. The thought brought the tears to his eyes, but he somehow managed to choke them down. He knew it was the young portion of him only that felt afraid. The body, the older self, could not feel fear, and had nothing to do with tears. He lay down again upon the hard mattress and waited, and soon afterwards the first crimson streaks of sunrise appeared behind the high elms, and rooks began to caw and shake their wings in the upper branches. A little later the governess came in. Before he could move out of the way, for he disliked being embraced, she had her arms round his neck and was covering him with kisses. He saw tears in her eyes. "You darling Jimbo," she cried. "They've come at last." "How do you know?" he asked, surprised at her knowledge and puzzled by her display of emotion. "I heard you scream to begin with. Besides, I've been watching." "Watching?" "Yes, and listening, too, every night, every single night. You've hardly been a minute out of my sight," she added. "I think it's awfully good of you," he said doubtfully. "But—" A flood of questions followed about the upright stones, the shadowy children, where she spent the night watching him, and 100 other things besides. But he got little satisfaction out of her. He never did when it was Jimbo, the child, that asked, and he remained Jimbo, the child, all that day. She only told him that all was going well. The pains had come, he had grown nice and thin and light. The children had come into his room as a hint that he belonged to their band, and other things had happened about which he would tell him later. The crisis was close at hand. That was all he could get out of her. "It won't be long now," she said excitedly. "They'll come tonight, I expect." "What will come tonight?" he asked with querulous wonder. "Wait and see," was all the answer he got. "Wait and see." She told him to lie quietly on the bed and to have patience. With asking questions and thinking and wondering, the day passed very quickly. With the lengthening shadows, his excitement began to grow. Presently Miss Lake took her departure and went off to her unknown and mysterious abode. He watched her disappear through the floor with mingled feelings, wondering what would have happened before he saw her again. She gave him a long last look as she sank away below the boards, but it was a look that brought him fresh courage, and her eyes were happy and smiling. Tingling already with expectancy, he got into the bed and lay down, his brain alive with one word: escape. From where he lay, he saw the stars in the narrow strip of sky. He heard the wind whispering in the branches, even smelt the perfume of the fields and hedges, grass, flowers, dew, and the sweet earth, the odors of freedom. The governess had, for some reason she refused to explain, taken his blouse away with her. For a long time he puzzled over this, seeking reasons and finding none. But while in the act of stroking his bare arms, the pains of the night before suddenly returned to both shoulders at once. Fire seemed to run down his back, splitting his bones apart, and then passed even more quickly than before, leaving him with the same wonderful sensations of lightness and strength. He felt inclined to shout and run and jump. It was only the memory of the governess's earnest caution to lie quietly that prevented his new emotions passing into acts. With very great effort he lay still all night long, and it was only when the room at last began to get light again that he turned on his side, preparatory to getting up. But there was something new, something different. He rested on his elbow, waiting. Something had happened to him. Cautiously he sat on the edge of the bed, and stretched out one foot and touched the floor. Excitement ran through him like a wave. There was a great change, a tremendous change. For as he stepped out gingerly onto the floor, something followed him from the bed. It clung to his back. It touched both shoulders at once. It stroked his ribs and tickled the skin of his arms. Half frightened, he brought the other leg over and stood boldly upright on both feet. But the weight still clung to his back. He looked over his shoulder. Yes, it was trailing after him from the bed. It was fan-shaped and brilliant in color. He put out a hand and touched it. It was soft and glossy. Then he took it deliberately between his fingers. It was smooth as velvet and had numerous tiny ribs running along it. Seizing it at last with all his courage, he pulled it forward in front of him for a better view, only to discover that it would not come out beyond a certain distance. It seemed to have got caught somewhere between his shoulders, just where the pains had been. A second pull, more vigorous than the first, showed that it was not caught, fastened to his skin. It divided itself, moreover, into two portions, one half coming from each shoulder. "I do believe they're feathers," he exclaimed, his eyes almost popping out of his head. And with a sudden flash of comprehension, he saw it all and understood. They were indeed feathers, but they were something more than feathers merely. They were wings. Jimbo caught his breath and stared in silence. He felt dazed, and bit by bit the fragments of the weird mosaic fell into their proper places, and he began to understand. Escape was to be by flight. It filled him with such a whirlwind of delight and excitement that he could scarcely keep from screaming aloud. Lost in wonder, he took a step forward and watched with bulging eyes how the wings followed him, their tips trailing along the floor. They were a beautiful deep red and hung down close and warm beside his body, glossy, sleek, magical. And when later the sun burst into the room and turned their color into living flame, he could not resist the temptation to kiss them. He seized them and rubbed their soft surfaces over his face. Such colors he'd never seen before, and he wanted to be sure that they really belonged to him and were intended for actual use. Slowly, without using his hands, he raised them into the air. The effort was a perfectly easy, muscular effort from the shoulders that came naturally. They did not quite understand how he accomplished it. The wings rose in a fine, graceful sweep, curving over his head till the tips of the feathers met, touching the walls as they rose, and almost reaching to the ceiling. He gave a howl of delight, for this sight was more than he could manage without some outlet for his pent-up emotion. And at the same moment the trap-door shot open, and the governess came into the room with such a bang and a clatter that Jimbo knew at once her excitement was as great as his own. In her hands she carried the blouse she had taken away the night before. She held it out to him without a word. Her eyes were shining like electric lamps. In less than a second he had slipped his wings through the neatly made slits, but before he could practice them again, Miss Lake rushed over to him, her face radiant with happiness. "Jimbo, my darling Jimbo!" she cried, and then stopped short, apparently unable to express her emotion. The next instant he was enveloped, wings and all, in a warm confusion of kisses, congratulations, and folds of hood. When they became disentangled again, the governess went down on her knees and made a careful examination. She pulled the wings out to their full extent and found that they stretched about 4.5 feet from tip to tip. "They are beauties," she exclaimed enthusiastically, "and full-grown and strong. I'm not surprised they took so long coming." "Long?" he echoed. "I thought they came awfully quickly." "Not half so quickly as they'll go," she interrupted, adding, when she saw his expression of dismay, "I mean, you'll fly like the wind with them." Jimbo was simply breathless with excitement. He wanted to jump out of the window and escape at once. The blue sky and the sunshine and the white flying clouds sent him an irresistible invitation. He could not wait a minute longer. "Quick!" he cried. "I can't wait. They may go again. Show me how to use them. Oh, do show me." "I'll show you everything in time," she answered. There was something in her voice that made him pause in his excitement. He looked at her in silence for some minutes. "But how are you going to escape?" he asked at length. "You haven't got—" He stopped short. The governess stepped back a few paces from him. She threw back the hood from her face. Then she lifted the long black cloak that hung like a cassock almost to her ankles, and had always enveloped her hitherto. Jimbo stared. Falling from her shoulders and folding over her hips, he saw long red feathers clinging to her, and when he dashed forward to touch them with his hands, he found they were just as sleek and smooth and glossy as his own. "And you never told me all this time," he gasped. "It was safer not to," she said. "You'd have been stroking and feeling your shoulders the whole time, and the wings might never have come at all." She spread out her wings as she spoke to their full extent. They were nearly 6 feet across, and the deep crimson on the underside was so exquisite, gleaming in the sunlight, that Jimbo ran in and nestled beneath the feathers, tickling his cheeks with the fluffy surface and running his fingers with childish delight along the slender red quills. "You precious child," she said, tenderly folding her wings round him and kissing the top of his head. "Always remember that I really love you. No matter what happens, remember that, and I'll save you." "And we shall escape together?" he asked, submitting for once to the caresses with a good grace. "We shall escape from the empty house together," she replied evasively. "How far we can go after that depends on you." "On me?" "If you love me enough, as I love you, Jimbo, we can never separate again, because love ties us together forever. Only," she added, "it must be mutual." "I love you very much," he said, puzzled a little. "Of course I do." "If you've really forgiven me for being the cause of your coming here," she said, "we can always be together, but—" "I don't remember. But I've forgiven you. That other you, long ago," he said simply. "If you hadn't brought me here, I should never have met you." "That's not real forgiveness, quite," she sighed, half to herself. But Jimbo could not follow this sort of conversation for long. He was too anxious to try his wings, for one thing. "Is it very difficult to use them?" he asked. "Try," she said. He stood in the center of the floor and raised them again and again. They swept up easily, meeting over his head, and the air whistled musically through them. Evidently they had their proper muscles, for it was no great effort. And when he folded them again by his side, they fell into natural curves over his arms as if they'd been there all his life. The sound of the feathers threshing the air filled him with delight and made him think of the big night bird that had flown past the window during the night. He told the governess about it, and she burst out laughing. "I was that big bird," she said. "You? I perched on the roof every night to watch over you. I flew down that time because I was afraid you were trying to climb out of the window." This was indeed proof of devotion, and Jimbo felt that he could never doubt her again. And when she went on to tell him about his wings and how to use them, he listened with his very best attention and tried hard to learn and understand. "The great difficulty is that you can't practice properly," she explained. "There's no room in here, and yet you can't get out till you fly out. It's the first swoop that decides all. You have to drop straight out of this window, and if you use the wings properly, they will carry you in a single swoop over the wall and right up into the sky." "But if I miss?" "You can't miss," she said with decision. But if you did, you would be a prisoner here forever. He would catch you in the yard and tear your wings off. It's just as well that you should know this at once." Jimbo shuddered as he heard her. "When can we try?" he asked anxiously. "Very soon now. The muscles must harden first, and that takes a little time. You must practice flapping your wings until you can do it easily, 400 times a minute. When you can do that, it will be time for the first start. You must keep your head steady and not get giddy. The novelty of the motion, the ground rushing up into your face, and the whistling of the wind are apt to confuse you at first. But it soon passes, and you must have a confidence. I can only help you up to a certain point. The rest depends on you. And the first jump? You'll have to make that by yourself," she said. "But you'll do it all right. You're very light, and you won't go too near the ground. You see, we're like bats, and cannot rise from the earth. We can only fly by dropping from a height, and that's what makes the first plunge rather trying. But you won't fall," she added. "And remember, I shall always be within reach." "You're awfully kind to me," said Jimbo, feeling his little soul more than ever invaded by the force of her unselfish care. "I promise you I'll do my best." He climbed onto her knee and stared into her anxious face. "Then you are beginning to love me a little, aren't you?" she asked softly, putting her arms round him. "Yes," he said decidedly. "I love you very much already." 400 times a minute sounded a very great deal of wing flapping, but Jimbo practiced eagerly, and though at first he could only manage about twice a second, or 120 times a minute, he found this increased very soon to a great deal more, and before long he was able to do the full 400, though only for a few minutes at a time. He stuck to it, pluckily, getting stronger every day. The governess encouraged him as much as possible, but there was very little room for her while he was at work, and he found the best way to practice was at night, when she was out of the way. She told him that a large bird moved its wings about 4 times a second, 2 upstrokes and 2 downstrokes. But a small bird, like a partridge, moved its wings so rapidly it was impossible for the eye to distinguish or to count the strokes. A middle course of 400 suited his own case best, and he bent all his energies to acquire it. He also learned that the convex outside curve of wings allowed the wind to escape over them, while the underside, being concave, held every breath. Thus the upward stroke did not simply counterbalance the downward and keep him stationary. Moreover, she showed him how the feathers underlapped each other so that the downward stroke pressed them closely together to hold the wind, whereas in the upward stroke they opened and separated, letting the air slip easily through them, thus offering less resistance to the atmosphere. By the end of a week, Jimbo had practiced so hard they could keep himself off the floor in mid-air for half an hour at a time, and even then without feeling any great fatigue. His excitement became intense, and meanwhile, in his body in the nursery bed, though he did not know it, the fever was reaching its crisis. He could think of nothing else but the joys of flying, and what the first awful plunge would be like, and when Miss Lake came up to him one afternoon and whispered something in his ear, he was so wildly happy that he hugged her for several minutes without the slightest coaxing. "It's bright and clear," she explained, "and Fright will not come after us, for he fears the light and can only fly on dark and gloomy nights." "So we can start?" he stammered joyfully. "Tonight," she answered, "for our first practice flight."